High-angle drone shot over the crimson spires of St. Basil's Cathedral. The sun is dipping low over Moscow, May 28, 1987. The air is thick with the smell of diesel and history. May 28th. Red Square, the heart of the Soviet Empire, the most heavily defended airspace on the planet, cut to a grainy, handheld-style shot. People in trench coats look up, shielding their eyes. A low hum vibrates through the cobblestones. Suddenly, the rhythmic marching of tourists stops. Heads turn, necks crane. Descending through the iron-gray clouds isn't a nuclear-tipped missile. It isn't a NATO stealth bomber. It's a tiny, single-engine Cessna 172. It looks like a mosquito buzzing toward a sleeping giant. The plane's shadow flickers across the Kremlin walls. This should have been impossible. For 3 decades, the USSR spent billions building an iron ring around Moscow. Thousands of radar stations. Tens of thousands of surface-to-air missiles. Supersonic interceptors on a hair trigger. And yet, here it was. The most powerful military apparatus in human history was about to be humiliated by a 19-year-old boy. Fast-paced montage, static-filled radar screens, Soviet generals shouting into telephones, a map of Europe with a red line snaking from Helsinki toward Moscow. The world woke up the next morning to a headline that felt like a glitch in reality. A teenager from West Germany, a kid who barely had his pilot's license, just parked his plane at the doorstep of the Politburo. How did he do it? Was he a genius, a spy, or just the luckiest man to ever sit in a cockpit? To understand how a single Cessna tore a hole in the Iron Curtain, we have to look past the propaganda. We have to look at the cracks in a system that thought it was invincible. Because on this day, the Soviet Union didn't just lose its pride, it lost its mind. Close up on a faded Polaroid, a lanky teenager with messy hair and a thin mustache. Matthias Rust. Meet Matthias Rust. In 1987, Matthias is just another kid in Wedel, West Germany. He's quiet, he's obsessive, he doesn't party, he doesn't cause trouble. He spends his time at the local flight club. Slow-motion shot of a small propeller spinning to life. But Matthias isn't just flying for fun. He's haunted. The Cold War is at its peak. Reagan and Gorbachev are locked in a nuclear staring match. The world feels like it's one mistake away from total annihilation. Matthias wants to do something about it. He wants to build a bridge between East and West. It's a naive, dangerous, and incredibly arrogant dream. Matthias looking at a map of the Soviet Union. His finger traces a path over the border. He tells his parents he's flying to Northern Europe to rack up hours for his professional license. He rents a Cessna 172. He removes the passenger seats. He adds extra fuel tanks. He isn't going to Scandinavia. He's going to the heart of the beast, alone, inexperienced, and completely oblivious to the fact that he's flying toward a death sentence. Dramatic 3D map animation. The USSR glows red. Around it, a pulsing blue web of radar coverage. To understand the scale of what Matthias was flying into, you have to understand the PVO Strany, the Soviet Air Defense Forces. This wasn't just a branch of the military. It was a cult of surveillance. They had over 2,000 interceptor aircraft, 10,000 surface-to-air missile launchers. A decade earlier, they had shot down a South Korean airliner just for straying into their path. Archive footage of a MiG-25 taking off with a roar. The Soviet philosophy was simple. If it doesn't belong here, it dies. There were no gray areas. There were no second chances. The radar network was designed to detect a single bird-sized drone at high altitudes. A Cessna? A bright blue and white Cessna? It should have been a fireball before it even reached the Estonian coast. But the Soviets had a weakness, a psychological one. They were so focused on the big threats, the B-52s, the Tomahawk missiles, that they forgot to look for the nothing. Helsinki-Malmi Airport. Morning mist, the Cessna lifts off. 12:21 p.m. Matthias takes off from Helsinki. He tells air traffic control he's heading to Stockholm. 20 minutes later, he turns off his radio. He banks the plane 180 degrees. He drops the altitude, the Cessna flying barely 200 feet above the choppy gray waves of the Baltic Sea. He's flying low to avoid radar, but he can't hide forever. At 1:10 p.m., he crosses the Soviet coastline near Estonia. A radar blip appears on a console in the 14th Air Defense Division, a green radar sweep hitting a small dot. The operators are confused. The blip is slow, too slow for a jet. They assign it a target number, 8255. 3 missile battalions are put on red alert. They have a lock. They are waiting for the word to fire. A Soviet officer's hand hovering over a button. But the word doesn't come. Why? Because of a bureaucratic nightmare. Just a few weeks earlier, there had been a massive shakeup in the command structure. Everyone was afraid of making a mistake. No one wanted to be the guy who shot down a civilian plane by accident. They send up 2 MiG-23 interceptors to investigate. Cinematic shot of a sleek silver MiG-23 screaming past the tiny Cessna. Matthias Rust looks out his window. To his left, he sees a giant, needle-nosed fighter jet. He can see the pilot's helmet. He can see the missiles under the wings. Matthias thinks, "This is it, I'm going to die." But the MiG pilot doesn't fire. He circles once. He sees a small plane. No visible weapons, no hostile maneuvers. He asks for instructions. Command is silent. The MiG, running low on fuel, is ordered to return to base. They leave him. They literally just leave him. Quick cuts between different Soviet radar stations. The blip is passed from one zone to the next. This is where the system begins to eat itself. As Matthias flies deeper into Russia, he enters a different radar zone. In this zone, there's a search and rescue operation happening for a crashed jet from the previous day. A chaotic map with multiple blips. The controllers look at target 8255. They assume it's a Soviet helicopter involved in the rescue. They change his status from unknown to friendly. With the stroke of a pen, Matthias Rust becomes invisible. Matthias flying over a dense forest. He looks calm, almost bored. He's flying at 2,000 feet. He's following the railway tracks toward Moscow. He's not using a computer. He's using a paper map. Every time he passes a new radar station, a new failure occurs. At one point, he flies through a training exercise. The local commander sees the blip and assumes it's a student who forgot to turn on his transponder. He tells his subordinates, "Don't worry about it. He'll learn." It's a cascade of arrogance. Each layer of the Soviet military assumes the layer before them did their job. If he was a threat, he would have been shot down at the border. Since he wasn't shot down at the border, he must not be a threat. The Iron Ring wasn't broken by technology. It was broken by a circular argument. The Moscow skyline appears on the horizon. The sun is setting, turning the sky a bruised purple. 7 p.m., Matthias Rust sees the golden domes of the Kremlin. He expected to be escorted. He expected to be arrested in the air. Instead, he's alone. He circles the city. He looks for a place to land. He thinks about landing inside the Kremlin walls, but he's afraid the KGB will just make him disappear. He wants an audience. The Cessna banking hard over the Moscow River. He lines up with Bolshoi Moskvoretsky Bridge, right next to Red Square. Cars are driving. People are walking. He touches down on the asphalt, narrowly missing a bus. The plane taxiing across the bridge and rolling directly into the middle of Red Square. The engine sputters. The propeller slows. Silence. Matthias climbs out of the cockpit. He's wearing a red flight suit. A crowd gathers. They think it's a movie set. They think he's a pilot from an air show. One woman approaches him. "Where are you from?" she asks. "West Germany," Matthias replies. "I'm here on a mission of peace." The crowd laughs. They don't believe him. Until the black Volga sedans arrive. Flash photography. Cold and harsh lights in an interrogation room. Soviet newspapers with shocked headlines. The aftermath was a bloodbath, politically speaking. Mikhail Gorbachev was in a meeting when he got the news. He was furious. This wasn't just a security breach. It was a cosmic embarrassment. Portrait of Defense Minister Sergei Sokolov. Gorbachev used the incident as a cleansing. He fired the Minister of Defense. He fired the head of the Air Defense Forces. Over 2,000 officers were sacked or demoted in one afternoon. A 19-year-old kid did more damage to the Soviet military hierarchy than the entire CIA had done in decades. Matthias in a Soviet courtroom. He looked small, tired. Matthias was sentenced to 4 years in a labor camp for hooliganism and violating flight laws. He served 432 days before being released as a gesture of goodwill. But the world he returned to was different. The myth of Soviet invincibility was dead. The Iron Curtain had a hole in it, and everyone knew it. Abstract animation of a clockwork machine. One tiny gear slips, and the whole thing grinds to a halt. So, how did he do it? It wasn't one thing. It was a Swiss cheese model of failure. Weather. Low clouds made visual identification difficult for the MiGs. Timing. He flew during a shift change at several radar stations. Bureaucracy. After the 1983 shootdown of KL-007, Soviet pilots were terrified of firing without explicit written orders. The small object filter. The Soviet systems were tuned to ignore slow-moving, low-altitude targets to prevent false alarms from flocks of birds. Matthias Rust didn't outsmart the radar. He outsmarted the people behind the radar. He flew in, the gap between total war and total peace. He was a threat the system wasn't programmed to care about. A slow zoom out from a single Cessna propeller to a wide shot of the Earth at night. We like to think that power is absolute. We build walls, we build missile shields, we create iron rings to keep ourselves safe. But history isn't moved by systems. It's moved by individuals. One kid with a map and a dream of peace proved that the most sophisticated defense in the world is only as strong as the person watching the screen. The Soviet Union fell a few years after Matthias Rust landed in Red Square. Some say his flight was the beginning of the end. The moment the world realized the giant was hollow.